today, and Paul is here to help as well. So welcome, Jeff. Look forward to working with you. We got a great team of folks here today. Just for your benefit and for everybody else's benefit, the working group consists of one member from each jurisdiction, and then we have invited guests from the CAC as well, two in the room, and I assume a few online, and we'll get to that. Moving on to the core subject for today's discussion, item 2. Paki will give you an update on the most recent CAC discussion, and then we'll open it up for a little bit more discussion. So Paki is online, and we'll have her pull up her presentation. And Paki, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. I didn't know if Crystal had the presentation, or you want me to pull it up on my end.
She has.
Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone, and nice to see what I can, all of you in the room. I just want to give you a very brief update on the last CAC meeting that was held on June 5th. At that meeting, what we did is we were the recommendations you, the working group, had from May 31st. We provided the spreadsheet in the CAC packet, and it's the same spreadsheet that you received today. The CAC did endorse the working group's recommendations, and they had a couple of suggestions that we also illustrated on the spreadsheet. The first one was to clearly refer to eligible system maintenance activities as capital maintenance, and you'll see that spelled out on the spreadsheet. And the second item was to include percentages for the categorical items. So you'll see those also on the spreadsheet. I believe they're like in a peach color. The staff also, we also reviewed the side-by-side comparison of a proposal that was submitted by CAC member Amanda Moss. You should have received the side-by-side in your packet as well. So I went over the CAC requested feedback from the working group on the proposal. So that was the request for today's meeting. And just as a note, the CAC did not take any action on that proposal. They just wanted to get additional.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out. Can you get a little bit closer to your microphone, please? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I was just saying that the CAC requested feedback from the working group on the proposal from CAC member Moss. However, they did not take any action on the above, on the reference proposal. So one of the things that we wanted to point out is that capital maintenance projects, there are currently 457 million total for the modernization projects. We also have the spreadsheet to pull up later during the meeting if needed. Out of that 457 million, more than half, about 250 million, may be considered for capital maintenance and can be clearly identified as part of the scope of each project. So just a note on that. In regards to the proposal that was submitted by CAC member Moss, the proposal cuts about 63% from the roadway corridor element that was budgeted by the working group. So it brings it from about 1.1 billion down to about 405 million. Also, the unnamed corridor projects are not authorized under this proposal. Based on the RTA regulations, corridors must be identified, and I believe you all received that legal memo explaining that. Also in the proposal, it cuts about 100 million from the group recommended budget. These are the TWG regional members that have met. And it also, which goes from about 380 million for the extension of current named transit services to about 280 million. The technology, economic, and environment element investments, as you've discussed in the past, by themselves, they're not eligible RTA expenses, but enhancements could be considered as long as they're transportation related and associated with any RTA construction or reconstruction project. So those are just some items we wanted to highlight about the proposals so that you have an idea of where we are. There is a more detailed side-by-side comparison in your packet. I don't know if you have any questions on that or if you want that pulled up.
So, yeah, Patty, we can proceed. We were hoping that Moss was able to join us today so she can present her proposal. Unfortunately, seems like she's not online. We do have obviously other CAC members here that they can all chime in, and it looks like Caroline likes to chime in. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did get something, excuse me, from Amanda Moss this morning, and she asked me to read it here. It's a full page. So to kind of explain her proposal, or our CAC proposal, she says, why is this proposal coming so late in the process? No one is trying to throw a last-minute wrench in the process. Since last year, there have been repeated requests from multiple CAC members to develop our own budget proposal and set of categoricals, things that are fundamental to plan development and wholly in the purview of the CAC to propose. However, we have largely been denied that opportunity. This proposal, drafted in April, was an attempt to provide the CAC with a foundation to have that discussion. Next, why this community-driven proposal? It's based on regional funding needs as identified by RMAP 2045's data-driven process. In contrast, the staff-driven proposal is basically a copy-paste of the outdated 20-year RTA 1.0 plan. The community-driven proposal is more aligned with the CAC's unanimously approved guiding principles. The named projects in every category will help ensure to voters that those type of investments are made at the expected proportion of the overall budget. This is important since in RTA 1.0, I didn't read this before, maybe I should read a little faster. The funds were swept from the categoricals to fund named road projects. In other words, the RTA did not deliver the plan that voters approved and expected. To approve RTA next, voters will need assurances that their tax dollars are generally spent as intended and expected. Named projects across categories can get front-loaded in the RTA next plan to ensure that current needs are met in a timely manner while allowing flexibility within categories later in the plan's life to ensure that changing community needs be met. I appreciate the ad hoc committee's attempt to take our feedback and create these new categories for the named road projects. CAC members raised fundamental concerns with the staff RTA next proposal, specifically underinvestment in the non-roadway categories. The ad hoc committee's proposal just reorganizes the same plan and applies new labels, and therefore does not really address concerns raised by CAC members. The community-driven proposal is more responsive to the CAC's priorities and stated concerns about the staff-driven proposal. The community-driven proposal incorporates the aspects of work the ad hoc has accomplished by using the committee's categories as sub-elements for the roadway element. Almost done. Two more little paragraphs. The community-driven proposal uses modern regional plans and research produced by PAG to inform sub-elements within the categories. For example, in 2018, PAG's Economic Vitality Advisory Committee, EVAC, Smart Communities Task Force, identified that in order to increase the region's economic competitiveness, we must focus on the modernization of our transportation system. Page 9 of the report, the task force outlines that road expansion is bad for businesses and suggests several strategies to foster economic vitality through modern transportation investments. These suggestions include implementing a Vision Zero initiative, preparing the region for EVs, and implementing adaptive signal control technology to reduce congestion, all of which are represented in the community-driven proposals sub-elements, including installing a backbone fiber network along major highways and main roads in the regions to enable the adaptive signal control technology. The health of our region is at stake here. We cannot afford another RTA1. Community-driven proposal provides a path for us to implement a safer, more modern, data-driven, and more equitable plan for our region. I hope this opportunity isn't wasted. I hope a plan isn't pushed through due to a false sense of urgency to meet arbitrary deadlines. Our community deserves something better than this community-driven proposal, and this community-driven proposal is a start. So that's Moss's intro to what the plan. And one other thing I will say, Pocky, is that what we endorsed was the framework that you've been working on, knowing that it's not final. And also, we were hoping to get feedback on the concept of what she's put together, not necessarily the numbers, because we haven't really looked at all the different numbers, just the concepts of the categoricals in named and unnamed projects when it's legal, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So again, you have a copy of the proposal in your packet. You have a response from staff on a side-by-side comparison. This issue was discussed at 2 separate CAC meetings. The CAC did not act on it. At the last meeting, CAC wanted to get feedback from the working group, so they requested for feedback from the working group. That's why it's in your packet. And unless you have any other questions, be happy to walk through the side-by-side if you like. If not, we can talk about the spreadsheet a little bit more in context of that proposal. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to give a little bit of flavor, I think, to conversations that the CAC has had around this, and a couple of important commonalities between this proposal from Moss and one from this group. One of those is the concept of naming categorical projects, which this group has discussed and largely agreed with, I guess, is my take on it. And I think particularly when we add the capital maintenance concept to these, in other words, the reconstruction of roadways, we begin to see the modernization projects as really largely slanted toward those categorical buckets and the reconstruction concept. Those are projects, as we all know, that are being rebuilt, pavement rebuilt, but it's largely the external, if you will, or the alternate modes portions of those projects that are really being addressed. Everything from bike paths and bike facilities, transit facilities, and then of course sidewalks and pedestrian facilities. So those are the commonalities that I see between the two proposals, if you will, and that to me is where I'd like to see some confirmation from this group, as well as some thoughts about, in particular, how some of the portions of the proposal, which staff has pointed out, don't work in the framework of our legislation. But I guess I'll leave it at that. But I wanted you to kind of have an idea of how the committee has, the CAC has been discussing these issues.
Tom, can you clarify? You said that this group has affirmed name projects and categoricals. I want to make sure I understand what your perception of that is.
Well, my perception is that when we've discussed it here, we've said it's a good idea. It can be done.
I just wanted to clarify because
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I don't, you know, because even our latest proposal includes a few of the modernization projects that are being at least partially funded with categorical money, safety money, et cetera. That to me is in essence tacit confirmation that that's a good idea, or that it's not something that should be left off the table.
A question online from Patricia Schwartz.
Patricia, go ahead, please.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to provide some context, having been at the CAC meeting. You mentioned that we could jump in, so I guess adding some more flavor, as Tom would say. But I just wanted to flag that not all of the motions regarding consideration of the alternative proposal that you're seeing at our last CAC meeting were accepted for a vote, and substitute motions were kind of cherry picked. And so it's true that we didn't act on any discussion of Moss's or the alternative proposal. We weren't really given a chance to vote on other ideas in my experience. There was a lot of robust conversation about topics that I've brought up several times at this committee, and other people have too, including like concerns about car-centric planning that threatens our region's climate future, a legacy of inequity and disinvestment in certain communities, things like that. As Tom and Moss's comments have both kind of mentioned, definitely support for adding named projects into each categorical element, and for increasing or revisiting the total bucket amounts for categoricals. And I did want to confirm, that the TMC hasn't made any recommendations for quantities of categorical buckets, which I don't think was like fully understood or conveyed or made super clear at the last CAC meeting. So just clarifying that there is no vote currently or endorsement on the table to accept recommendations on the categorical amounts. And I hope that that is something that both this body and the CAC can spend some time really revisiting and, thinking through and incorporating some of the conversations that CAC had last time. And I do also want to note that the motion that did pass in order to endorse the current roadway plan passed by a vote of, I believe, 7-9, and barely had quorum. So I'm just a little worried about like voter support in moving forward with something that feels a little bit divided or tenuous in the CAC. So thanks.
All right, any other questions or comments? If not, we can dive into the spreadsheet one more time, and hopefully everybody can follow along some of the conversations, and I'll be more than happy to kind of summarize what we heard and what we hope to accomplish. So the spreadsheet that's in front of you is the latest and greatest, recommended by the working group, endorsed by the CAC. CAC requested for a couple things, and Tom touched on one of them, to be very clear on what elements of the individual corridor projects potentially are capital maintenance. We can do that within the description of each project. We can clearly identify which ones are capital maintenance and reconstruction projects. That's very reasonable to do, and I think it would benefit the public to understand which projects are actually improving the condition of the roads. So that'll be done throughout the process. We'll modify those to identify that. The other thing that the motion from the CAC included was to, on the second page where you see the individual elements, they asked to identify what percentages of the total available RTA dollars are allocated to each element. So as you can see, safety is rounded up to 8%. Environmental would be 1.6%. Transit is roughly rounded up to 27%. Active transportation, 4.7%. So that was at the request of the CAC, which we added on the spreadsheet. Ultimately, if you recall, the ballot itself, once it's all done, the ballot itself requires to demonstrate how much RTA dollars are spent on each project, each element. And then there's also a requirement to demonstrate percentages of the overall RTA funds that are going towards each element. So that's required by statute anyway. We'll do that at the end of the process as well. Other than that, again, to kind of respond to some of the questions we hear every now and then, what you have endorsed in front of you is fully balanced. It addresses the 4 carryover projects from the current RTA program to the next RTA program. That's in here as well. And then ultimately it addresses the question that I think everybody keeps bringing up, is that what are we going to do to be flexible and accommodate changes? And that's ongoing discussion with the board. I truly believe, and based on our conversations, I believe everybody likes to have some element of flexibility in the delivery of the next RTA plan. That's been discussed with the board all along, and I think the board will continue to have that conversation. Any questions on the spreadsheet? Any thoughts, suggestions? Yes.
If I can just get clarification on one thing, Mr. Ruggieri, when we talk about the 4 projects that we flipped from RTA or that we've continued from RTA to RTA next, and we talk about taking those dollars off the top, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly and how that's being done. So if we had $100 million and we have 200, well, I'm not saying that right, but however, if I were more articulate about that, we're taking it just straight across the top, right? It does not, it's not coming out of this road projects,
Yep,
or
straight off the top, so reduce the size of the pie, and then the balance of the pie now it's divided up the way you had divided up. So 1.91 billion is what's left to program.
okay, and that has been
Yes,
fairly okay.
yes. And again, that's obviously at the discretion of the board. We've been having that discussion with the board. It's in my opinion, that's an approach to demonstrate that those projects will be completed as part of the ballot initiative, as part of the ballot itself. We have to identify which period those projects are going to be done. Excuse me. And the board's commitment has been that keep those projects in the first period. Those 4 projects.
To follow up to that, if I may, and just a lot of these conversations have been going on in the community, so we're hearing certain things. And one of the comments I've heard, and I'm interested in how you and have handled this or the board, that if you look at what had been committed to, other than the name projects from 2006, what actually has been spent has seen a decrease in what is not the name projects. How has that been proportionately? What happened? With that, how is that modified, and should that be taken into consideration as we move into RTA next? The way we have moved the road projects forward.
Sure. So that's part of the flexibility need that's been discussed all along. Lessons learned from the current RTA. Most of you were at the table, maybe not all of you, some of you were at the table in 2014. So in 2014, as part of our ongoing monitoring of the revenue forecast, the revenue forecast was updated. The board recognized that due to the recession, the revenues are not coming in as anticipated. So the actual collection of the RTA dollars, even at that time, were projected to be roughly 27% less than what was programmed in 2006. The Technical Management Committee recommended a reduction of roughly 27% from all the categories, but not from the actual projects that are identified on the ballot as corridor projects. Those 35 corridor projects can reduce it from the corridor, 27% of the corridor, not buckets yet to be determined in the future. That's where the flexibility was. Management Committee recommended that reduction, RTA reduction. As a result, even today, almost 17 years after when the when the initial forecast was put together, we estimate that about $1.7 billion in reality is going to be collected. 2006, the projection was $2 billion. So in reality, to make up that difference of actual dollars versus the forecast, the 27% reduction from all those categories helped. That was one part of the solution. The other part of the solution was to bring state and federal dollars to the table to complete some of those corridor projects. So that flexibility, the governance, and the board's authority to be able to deliver the projects gave them that option of that's where we can actually provide some shifting of those funds to finish the corridor projects. That was directed by the board in 2014. I still believe as a governing body, even in the next plan, they need to have that flexibility. They need to be able to make those decisions as they deal with reality of actual economy and the revenues that come in. If you don't have the revenue, you can't spend it. And that's exactly what they did.
And so then to be clear, when we've talked about whether we want to have named or unnamed projects in the categoricals, that is a preference of the board for the ballot. It is a preference of the board and the staff.
The legal requirement is to identify corridors. That is by statute. If we're spending money on a corridor, we need to identify it and have it on the ballot,
But not in the category.
not the other elements.
May I ask?
Sure, of course.
And help me understand, because I don't have clarity. Is the proposal before us today recommended by CAC?
Endorsed by the CAC.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Moss proposal? No. It's
But
not.
the
It's asked us
spreadsheet,
to review.
We haven't acted on it.
but the
Okay.
spreadsheet we have in front of you was endorsed by the CAC.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, Madam Lesher. Yes, we kind of turfed it to the TMC. We hadn't had a chance to look at it, but there was a lot of discussion about named projects in categoricals. And I think what Farhad, you're saying is that that is allowed. It's just only required in the named corridor projects. And a lot of that, as Moss said in her intro, a lot of that has come from exactly the fact that the named projects are the promise to the voters. And so the flexibility enabled when the tax was revenue was not coming in as it was projected to, the flexibility was all in the categoricals. And so that's why the money, the 27% across the board was put into the road projects. And that was the impetus behind it, is to have some flexibility in all the categories, or at least have named projects in all the categories. That's not flexible money that can be moved around. So, some of the feedback that is requested is, do you want, maybe even if you agree with that, and you all at the TMC have been talking about having named projects, moving them to categoricals, would there even be a preference to have all named projects throughout the categoricals and no unnamed projects in the categories? And that's something, I don't know if you've really specifically talked about that, but that was another option. But that's some of the feedback that we would like to get from you. And there may be some categories that could have named and unnamed, and others that they should all be named.
Yeah, of course. So, Jan, go ahead, and I want to respond to that
Okay.
as well, but go ahead.
Since I'm filibustering, right, I might
Go for
keep
it.
going. But I think there's two parts that I want to kick around. I think we've discussed them before. I think some of the, whether they're named or unnamed, comes under the style, more than substance to some extent, and how we look at what's going to go before the voters. I think that it's important to have flexibility, and I think that the greatest ability we have to identify to voters what we're going to do is helpful. So I would just say, I wonder if at some point we could staff evaluate, would it be possible to say, if we don't have named projects in the categoricals, could there be a statement or something on a ballot that indicates that while we're not naming them for flexibility, they will not be moved to road projects? But could you somehow narrow or limit to provide some clarity to the voters of what will happen without providing a named project.
Correct. So if I understand the question correctly, in addition to the ballot itself, there will be an educational packet that goes along with the ballot. So there are opportunities for the board to communicate more information in the educational packet. And then in addition to that, we have administrative code. Over the life of the new plan, the administrative code guides some of these discussions and decisions. So the board can include those provisions in the administrative code. Does that answer your question? And then let me respond to your question, because I think that's important. At the same time, we're hearing from a lot of folks in the community that even looking at the 2006 plan, only 35 projects were actually named. To date, we've completed almost 1,000 projects. So over 960 projects have these buckets. And when we talk to folks in the community, they appreciate that, they understand that, because they recognize as the needs come up, the governing body has that flexibility and that authority to address those needs and be responsive. To name a lot of those projects today for the next 20 years, it's doable, but it's complicated, I believe, and two, I think it takes away from that flexibility for future needs. So I've had folks from Green Valley say, there's nothing in Green Valley, but we like what's the approach with these buckets because we know there's opportunity in the future.
Under that, as we talk about the categories and what projects are where, one of, we've talked about this, I think, and I don't know who's at the TMC or a work group, but as not being the engineer at the table, it strikes me that there are elements within what is a named road project that could be, or would at least by a layperson be considered a response to safety, you know, or something like that. So, and I think we have made a determination, and it's very nebulous right now to me, but that a project is $10 million in our dreams, but whatever that project might be, it might include a safety element. And so as we describe and delineate these projects, have we in some way created a almost artificial bifurcation of, or an inaccurate distribution where something is saying it's a road project, but could as easily be described as a safety? In the same way I'm looking at from sort of that style element, specificity versus flexibility is an important balance that we have to look at. How these projects are delineated or defined is this determining where the money in the buckets is going, and could that not in some way be reassessed without, I'm not trying to skew it and play games with it, but is it more appropriately perhaps defined?
So let me touch on that again, going back to the protocol would be that the educational packet that goes along with the ballot would identify every single corridor and then describe what that corridor scope is, what the budget is, and then you can even break it down further, which is, we already asked our team that's doing the cost estimating to identify it as much as possible, to break it down and say 10% of this project provides additional active transportation enhancements. 15% of this project provides safety. Another 20% provides capacity. So that can be accomplished later on in that packet, and we'll take anybody's feedback. It's going to be an art. It's not a science. You can't assume what percentage of that project is safety, but you can assess assumption, and it's more of a narrative discussion for the public to understand. If you vote for these projects, these are the type of benefits that you would get by implementing these projects. Yes.
Yeah, we did have discussed, the CAC has a couple of the thoughts that you've expressed just now and that you brought up at the last meeting as well. One of those is describing the scope within the actual ballot in terms of what sort of project it is. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you have a regular congestion relief project where you're widening, you're going to describe that in that way. if you have another project, say a modernization project where reconstruction of the roadway and enhancement of some of the other elements that come from categories can be described with each of those, so that your scope, that the abbreviated scope that is seen on the ballot will let you know that, yes, there is safety element here. There's also reconstruction element. There's also a transit element, whatever those might be, so that the public has a fairly clear understanding that those elements are a part of a specific project. The other part of that was perhaps describing, as you had asked the last meeting, if we couldn't come up with a better description than named projects, right? And this group developed these 4 different headings, if you will, for individual corridor projects. And I think we could even go a little bit further, or even just using those, provide that sort of grouping on a ballot as well. And that's part of how I think you can let people see that you are naming safety projects, you are naming reconstruction projects, et cetera, by telling them what the corridor is, because we have to define it, but also telling them what other elements are present in those kinds of projects.
Thank you.
So I don't disagree with some of the things you're saying, Tom, and they certainly, we've talked a number of times, either at TMC meetings or ad hoc meetings, they all kind of blur together at this point. But I think you're absolutely right. So many of the corridor, in fact, I'm not sure that I could identify a single corridor project that doesn't have elements of categoricals within them. And if you start adding up all of those categoricals that somehow fit into the various corridor projects, I think you see that there's a lot of modernization in all of the named projects. There's a lot of safety and intersection monies that will be going into these projects. And, you know, I think we came here to meet today to decide if we were going to consider an alternate proposal. And I wasn't really, quite frankly, in favor of having this meeting to do that. But we're here now. And I could tell you, after reading it, after listening to what's being proposed, I don't see value and I don't see the point. At this point in the game, and I know it was said that, you know, there was an opportunity to present the proposal, made attempts. I listened to the CAC. I don't agree with that position. That wouldn't be my perspective in listening to the CAC meetings, that there wasn't opportunity and there wasn't, you know, they weren't given that chance. I don't think that that's true. So I think that the TMC has worked very hard for over a year now on getting us to the point where we're at right now. And what the RTA board has directed us and the CAC, the direction that we've been given is to identify these projects, get them within budget and make a recommendation to them. The last meeting that we had, I felt like we were there. Now the art of it, if you will, is going to come later. There's going to be opportunity to refine and identify exactly what goes where and how the ballot reads and all of those things, because it does have to appeal to the voters. And I think that what we've done up to this point is put together a group of named projects that will appeal to the voters. And each one of them has categorical elements within them that are going to appeal to all segments of our communities. So I don't see any value in taking a look at another proposal and taking a step backward. I think we've come this far. This is where we're at, and we need to continue to push forward.
Thank you.
Brian is.
Yes, Brian, go ahead, please.
Hello, thank you. To speak to the categoricals, and the elements there within on the name projects, I'd like to actually bring up one specific project that comes to mind because I travel through it every single day almost, and that's the Cortero and I-10 interchange. And when we're talking about safety, yes, there's a congestion issue there. There's not enough room basically, or lanes to handle the amount of traffic goes through there, but it's also with an at-grade railroad crossing that hinders the amount of traffic that can flow through there in any given day, given the amount of trains that pass through there. But there are tremendous safety elements in that as well. And I think it's important to remember that anytime you have an at-grade railroad crossing, cars, pedestrians, bicyclists are all impacted by that. And there is certainly safety concerns along with that. And you only have to go one exit to the south to Ina Road to see what it can look like. When you redo that interchange, you add sidewalks that don't currently exist. You add bike lanes that don't currently exist. You add crosswalks that don't currently exist. You avoid the roughly 60 to 80 trains that pass through there a day. So I think there are tons of safety elements in a lot of these projects. That's just one that really stands out to me that are addressed by this. And then also when it comes to the CAC, I'd like to give my impression. There was while the motion did pass to bring Moss's proposal to the TMC for at least evaluation and consideration, there was also a lot of frustration expressed by me and others at that meeting that we've, as the CAC in particular, I mean, I've been on since the beginning. This is 4 years and a lot of compromise has gone into this. Certainly there's a lot more projects that everyone would like to include if the funding was available to do it. But I feel like all jurisdictions have given some, and yet all jurisdictions are well represented in this. We can't achieve everything we're hoping to achieve or want to achieve, but it's a good, well-rounded plan. And it does take all modes of transportation into consideration. And it does take, the safety of the residents, of the members of the community into consideration. So that's just the little bit I'd like to add to that.
Thank you, Brian, for that. I was going to say something along those lines, but a little bit more technical. So appreciate your perspective. Again, keep in mind, every single project will go through a design concept report. It will go through an assessment. If there are elements of the project that are not even identified today, but 15 years from now, there is a safety issue on that project, it will be addressed. That's part of that. That's part of that flexibility. We're not going to have a brand new project that doesn't address all the needs of that project. So keep that in mind, that the actual design concept report and identification of what needs are to be met, that comes during the implementation. Go ahead.
So at some point, Farhad, could we then take some of the elements that are in the corridor projects that fall into the buckets and call those out and identify them for people? So say for example, and I think Brian's example there, Brian, thank you for that, is a good example. Let's say that's 100 million, it's probably not to be 100 million, but help me out, Rod. Say it's $100 million project, and let's say 20 million of that is elements that relate to railroad safety, pedestrian safety, intersection safety, whatever those are. It's 20% here and 10% there and 5% there. Can we work to try, and I know we can't do that now until we get probably a little bit further into the process and identify the scopes of the projects and what needs to be done. But I think that does, to the I think Jan's point, I think to Tom's point, and to what Brian was saying, I think that does for the voters kind of help them to see this isn't just about widening a roadway. It's about so many other things, improving transit, improving multimodal modes of transportation, bicyclists, pedestrians, the whole bit. So if we can do that maybe at some point in the line, I think that would be
definitely. We have already asked our consultant who's doing the cost estimating, break it down based on cost. That's one way of doing it, unless we do it based on assumptions and the art of it. So cost estimating, X amount of the improvements are for active transportation, X amount is for safety, X amount is for structure modernization, yeah. So they can break it down based on cost, but again, that's something that comes later in the process. From our perspective, that's additional information to educate the public with, and we hope that if you have a perspective, go ahead and provide that perspective to us now. If you don't, this is individual jurisdictions on your own projects. If you want to provide that perspective to us now, we'll share it with the consultants so they can kind of align that with the cost estimate. Yes.
I was going to add, in theory, we may not be that far off from what this proposal is in the first place. In theory, that as what Terry said, that every element has a chunk of the buckets in it, and you're going through that process, and the list itself stands good on its own right now. It was what the compromise came together with all the jurisdictions, and that accounting for that identification of where the buckets are in each of the projects would show that yes, the actual congestion element is just a small percentage of what the overall project provides. So I think there's not a lot of disparity here by maintaining the current list the way it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Again, so we're looking at a one pager for every single project, that every corridor. That one pager will break down all this information. And that's to make sure the public has the information before they make a decision. And currently we're looking at a narrative to begin with, and then we'll put dollar amounts to it and percentages of each project.
Jamie.
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add use Tom's word, flavor. The CAC, it was a travel day for me, so I could only attend a portion of the meeting, and I was not able to vote. And to be honest, I almost really didn't get a chance to say anything edgewise from some of the other folks. I kind of I hear what Terry's saying. I think there was opportunity to make some changes. I think we should move forward with this plan. People I talk to, they want roads. They also want bike paths. They also want pedestrian. They want people to be safe. So Moss's plan seems a little bit tilted in favor of pedestrians and bicycles. And I don't think that's going to work. So I don't think we're going to get a 100% vote. I know there's a percentage of voters that want to see that also. So I think we need a balanced plan, which I think that's what we have now. I think the TMC, if they move forward with this, is probably a good idea, and we just keep going. I do want to offer a potential compromise. I think we've been hearing for the last few months that there's some concerns that keeps getting brought up in the CAC as well about credibility of the RTA, since we didn't complete all the categoricals, right? And we had to shift some funds. Is there a compromise where we could have some named projects in the categoricals? And that way, not all of them, because I think we need that flexibility, but is that a potential compromise to offer to the group, that we establish so many named projects? That way people have that assurance, the voters have that assurance that things will get done that we wanted to get done. That's it.
Thank you, Jamie. So I think that's what we've been discussing, that if there's an opportunity to identify that and add that to the conversation later. But for the purpose of this document, if I can speak for this group, it seems like everybody's comfortable with where we're at. It was recommended by this group. It was endorsed by the CAC. You're not interested in making any other changes?
No, yeah, I think you just covered what I was going to say. So
Anything else? No. All right.
Patricia.
Any other? I saw some movement over there. Questions? No. Okay, Patricia, go ahead.
Hi. I'm just a little concerned because I don't feel like what I'm hearing is a compromise. I'm concerned that, for example, a 6-lane roadway project with a bike lane slapped onto the side of it is maybe going to be tried to be sold to the voters as a safety project or something in the safety element, when that is incredibly dangerous and terrifying, and I would never use that bike lane. The point of including named safety projects and other, categorical projects is to reconsider how our roads have traditionally been designed because people are dying on them at crisis rates. And so adding like one element of quote unquote safety onto a roadway designed in this same exact dangerous way, to me, does not check the safety box and really worries me. And I just want to say that even if this plan was tilted in favor of pedestrians, transit, bicycles, which I don't think it actually is, it would be a remediation measure to what we've been doing for the past several decades, which is designing almost exclusively to preference personal vehicles, which we know is contributing to climate crisis and death on our roadways. So I'm just like a little concerned at what I'm hearing, and I don't feel like the CAC's in its entire breadth of opinion is being represented. And in the statement that like, oh, we endorse this roadway element and we can walk back the categoricals or kind of do what we did before. So I just needed to express that. I need to leave soon. So thanks for having me, but I'm just a little concerned and I don't think I'm hearing a lot of compromise.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I just need to express that what our job is as the chairs is to try to bring our committee along and get something that that everybody or most everybody can endorse. And I agree with Paul that it's really not that far off. A couple of clarifications is that I didn't want to talk about numbers, but I can't remember the number that Pocky used for roadways, but this proposal, if you put the multimodal roadways and add the capital maintenance, it's just under 900 million for roadways in here, which yes, is a couple $100 million difference than yours. And we want to get something that we can all endorse. And you heard from Brian and Jamie, and you heard from Patricia, and this is kind of what we've been dealing with, but I think there are ways forward. And I want to suggest something that has been discussed with, and again, I want to say, Farhad, it was very clear in our motion that we were endorsing the framework of what you're working on, not the plan. That was pretty well stated, but also if the deferred projects, the 230 million deferred projects that are coming off the top were included in the roadway element, but kept in the first 5 years. And the rest of that would mean your work isn't done here yet. Then couple projects might need to be deleted or a bunch of them shaved a little bit or a lot, in the different scopes. That I think that would go a long way in our committee. I mean, the last thing we want to do is have a CAC recommendation and a TMC recommendation going to the board. And somebody talked about that way at the beginning of the process. The TMC is technical advisor to the CAC, and you've gotten a lot farther in that element, the roadway element, than we have in any other part of it. But something like that could go a long way to have a little bit more money spread around in the categoricals. There's that technology that has been introduced both by Pima County early on and in this proposal that may not be an element all in and of itself, but could also be scattered around the different categories, including roads. And so, again, I don't think it's that far off. I think we're trying to be creative here that we can get the entire CAC on board for a concept moving forward, or actually a plan moving forward, including most of what's been done here, but with a little more work of some, and again, I would suggest that the way to go would be to put the $230 million of deferred projects first 5 years, but include it in that roadway element for the voters to see that that's clearly what it is and not this other category, because it's a road category, corridor category. So that's just something I wanted to throw out that we've talked about there, and see if that gets any traction.
Thank you. So again, for the benefit of the public, our understanding was that the CAC endorsed the recommendation from the working group There was a split vote, but they did endorse the recommendation, and I'll ask the chair to confirm that.
Yeah, the motion was to, as Carolyn says, to endorse the framework. In essence, the plan that was presented. So there were a lot of conversations by those who voted for and against the motion to tweak, if you will. And we've talked about all that today, and this group has been talking about it for the last several meetings. So I think that is about the best I can do to clarify that. We do have Jamie in mind.
Go ahead, and I want to come back to the 4 deferred projects. Go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, no, I hit the button wrong. Disregard.
And that Mike goes next, but let me respond to the 230 deferred projects. Again, that was a direction of the board. The board wanted to demonstrate that they are committed to completing those 4 projects. So they set that aside. And then after that decision was made, they came back with a $1.1 billion budget for the remaining corridor projects. So just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Yes, Mike.
So I wanted to go back and chat a little bit about the split vote. I think, Tom, you mentioned it. It's material. Those split votes happen all the time with our elected bodies. If you go to the ballot, you know, your goal, our goal is 50% plus 1, right? And if we get that as a ballot, we got direction with it. Go with that. I'm however concerned that when the group that has been established that represents the community on a macro scale is split so evenly for 1 vote difference, that's a razor thin margin, but I'll call the start of the process to get to a vote. And that concerns me because I think that it just shows there is not consensus. You vote, but there's not consensus. And I wanted to voice that because I think that just very simplistic view, I think that it's problematic. It's my gut. Now, what does it look like to get, should it be 75-25 or 90-10? I don't know, but when you're at that level, and that represents the community, it takes nothing to do this. And let me just make one last comment. The other thing that concerns me, and I just want you to hear it, maybe I want to hear myself say it, is the concern that, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, but I think you read it in Moss's commentary, Carolyn, the concern that we didn't do what we said we were going to do, you know, in the 2006 RTA. That causes me concern. That rhetoric, I think, will sink us. And I think that we have to figure out how to succinctly respond to that. If in fact we have data that shows otherwise, fine. But, and I remember some of those conversations 8 years ago where we made a conscious decision, the board made a conscious decision to use categorical funding to complete roadway projects because of the cost increases. Yeah, totally understandable. But I think if someone wants to poke holes in what we're doing, that credibility would be called into question. And I think that we as a team, all inclusive, have to think about that and develop a strategy for addressing that moving forward. So thank you.
Go ahead.
So to Mike's second point first, you know, I think it is important that the voters have a clear message and that we have a clear message with regard to what was or was not accomplished in the RTA. And I think a lot of it is going to boil down to reminding people of what was done in RTA, because there's a huge number of projects that had significant impact to the entire region. And people forget about that. They forget about the widening of Tangerine. They forget about the widening of La Jolla Boulevard and La Cañada and Lambert and the interchanges at Ina and Twin Peaks and Broadway and all of these other projects that were a direct result of the RTA. So I'm not as concerned about people saying, hey, we didn't deliver what we said. Yeah, anytime you're talking about projecting into the future 20 years how much money we're going to have, there's things that can go and will go wrong. And so to say that, well, we didn't do every single thing said we were going to do, that's a possibility. It's a probability. It actually happened, but we did most of it. So I think the message there, I believe that we'll be able to construct a message that is very positive and reminds people of the huge benefit of RTA and therefore RTA next. With regard to the boat issue, Mike, I have a little bit different perspective, and part of it's, I think, probably because I listened in on most of the CAC meetings. And I hear the discussions. And so while the vote may have been close, you're only talking about 15 members of the body. And that body is supposed to be, what, 32, 34?
29 now.
29. So you had about half of the people that weren't even there. And I've talked to some of those people who haven't been as involved and engaged because they're frustrated with a few people being the loudest voice and having the most to say and derailing what they really want to do. So I think that there's probably, this is just my summation and perspective related to what I'm seeing and hearing as I listen to those, as there's more support for what we've done up to this point. And I think Brian, when he jumped on the line earlier, kind of alluded to that. There's more support for what we've done up to this point from the TMC side of it than that vote would indicate. So I don't have as much heartburn perhaps as Mike does, and you know, maybe as much as the rest of the board does. I don't know how, or the group does. I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but you know, my perspective is that we're just too far down the track to start deviating from where we're at. And, you know, is there room for compromise? Maybe, but I don't know that has to be settled here today.
Thank you. One quick follow-up, if you don't mind. So going back to current RTA. Current RTA, the governing board's decision was, let's not take on any new projects. Let's complete what we promised. So that is the actual action of the board. Don't take on new projects that have yet to be identified. Use any actual dollars coming in to finish what we already promised. And I think that was a responsible thing to do for the body. Go ahead.
Just two quick thoughts. One, I'm realizing from our project, what I will be chatting with staff about, I'm beginning to think of each one as more of a Venn diagram than a linear program, and how much of it is for safety, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be moving forward with that. The other piece, I just say that I think the direction given to us by the board was to develop name projects totaling 1.1 billion. And that is what we have done. And I think we've done a good job making sure that that is reflective and representative. Some of these other issues that are coming up, how do we flip the projects forward? Where does that bucket of money come from, et cetera? I plan to go back and chat with our representative, you know, on the RTA board about whether he would like to bring forward to the board those kinds of policy determinations or considerations. But I think that's just not in the purview of what we were, from my perspective, as the TMC directed to do. So I think, you know, I don't even think we need a motion to do anything. From the TMC side, we've recommended something. I wanted to be sure we were here. I think, like Terry and others, that if there was additional information coming from the CAC, that we had an opportunity to really hear that in terms of what I believe to be our recommended name projects totaling the 1.1 billion. We have voted on that. That's done. And I'm not sure that at this point, with the authorities we have, we should make an adjustment.
You are 100% correct. Again, as you all recall, started with $4.6 billion worth of asks. Now you're down to 1.1. That is a significant amount of discussions, compromise, and in my opinion, that demonstrates the regional collaboration that you were able to do that. Some of the folks came to the table on their own and removed projects. Some of the folks went back and modified the scope of those projects. That's the regional collaboration that I believe that we need to demonstrate to the CAC and everybody else, that that's really the only way to get these things done. So I want to thank you all. And the feedback to the CAC would be along those lines, that I think everybody came to the table, everybody did their part, and what we have in front of us is something that you're comfortable with. Yes, Brian.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'd like to go back to, and it's really hard to kind of tell on the video who's talking. Was it City Manager Ortega who was expressing some concern about how close the vote was?
Yes. Yes. It was.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And you know what, Mr. Manager, I appreciate that. I certainly wish, I would love a unanimous vote. I would love to see a bigger margin of the vote one way or another. And for the whole group, I personally voted no on that proposal, but it wasn't because I disagreed with the framework or the projects that were included. It was because I did not believe we needed to bring an alternative option back to this committee for consideration. So that was the reason for my no vote. Otherwise, if we were voting up or down on what was presented, I most certainly would have been a yes vote. I will speak only for my own opinion. I feel like there's, at the CAC, there's two camps. Those who are trying to look holistically at all modes of transportation, and certainly I want to, for myself, speak that all modes of transportation, whether it be pedestrian, bicycle, public transit, or private vehicle, are all important to me, that they are considered at every single project. But there's another camp who really has expressed flat out that they do not want to see any expansion for cars, that they want fewer cars on the road and want more people to either walk, bike, or take public transit. And when you look at the voters, and I don't know the numbers, and maybe we can pull this, Farhad, but the vast majority of people in Southern Arizona, in the region, use private vehicles. So if we're trying to appeal to the voters, the suggestion of we're not worried about roadway expansion, we're not worried about reducing congestion, we would rather you give up your vehicle and take another form of transportation. And that's just me speaking at how I'm receiving some of the information. I don't think that's going to go over well with the voters either. I think we really need to have a plan that appeals to all voters, regardless of their modes of transportation, and making all modes of transportation, whether it be pedestrian, bicycle, public transit, or personal vehicle, improving all of those for all those people so that they can feel safe and they can choose the mode of transportation that they favor. And we are making it easier for them to get around the region as a whole. So that's my feedback regarding that. But Mr. Ortega, I certainly do appreciate that. I would like to see a very strong vote, and I would like to see whatever plan gets pushed forward be passed by the voters, because I personally believe that RTA1 has been extremely successful for the region.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Brian, I'm going to speak for the other camp, because Brian, I think everybody on our committee is looking at a holistic plan. It's the devil's in the details, and it's a matter of degrees. And there are a lot of people, and you've talked about it here, we've talked about it at our CAC, that are really concerned about safety out there, that people are getting run over all the time. I mean, look at this, the whole conversation you've had on First Avenue. But anyway, I think everybody, and I would love to think that we can get consensus or close to it. Because if we do have unhappy half, they're going to be bringing up the things that Mr. Ortega brought up. And it's going to have to do with a campaign. But at this point, what I'd really like to see is that we do get closer to consensus. And I hope that everybody on your camp, Brian, would like to see people having opportunities to get around safely with all different modes, whether or not you choose to do that. And that's what the conversations we've been having. And I hope everybody here wants to do that too. Again, I would love to come up with some way, and we're struggling with it, that we can come together, because I don't think that there's any difference in the philosophy. It's just the matter of degrees, and obviously all comes down to money.
Mr. Chair, could I respond to that real quickly?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I'd like to, and I'm kind of sorry I said the word, there's two different camps. There's just some different ideologies. Carolyn, for the record, I've worked with you for a long time in this committee and others, and I deeply respect the way you seek compromise and work across all parties. So I certainly appreciate what you just said. And certainly if you know my profession, safety is a top priority for me. I also am not a road engineer, so I don't know the best way to achieve that, but bicyclists, pedestrians, any way we can do these corridors to protect them and separate them from vehicles, I think would be paramount and should be considered in this. And it's not that any of the ideas being presented are bad, and I certainly respect the ideas of everybody else on that committee. I'm just, like everybody else, I think, trying to look for that compromise and something that is not only can pass the voters, but more importantly is beneficial to the community as a whole once they're implemented. So Carolyn, I completely respect your comments. What you said, I'm just not that road engineer knows how to get there, but I agree that safety for all parties, I think is very important.
Thank you, Brian. Mike, and then Tom.
So in my prior life, I was a road engineer, trained by Tom and John Bernal. So
Don't hold
that
that
might
against
explain some things here. And I don't know what the final solution looks like, Brian. So that might give you some level of, but I think we're getting hung up on and used the word ideology here. And I think we just have to take a little bit of a step back. And that's what I suggested a bit ago when you look at the urban core versus outside of the urban core. It's unrealistic for me to think somebody would ride their bicycle 20 miles to go to work. That's just unrealistic for me. Maybe it's just because I don't see myself doing it. However, the connectivity of the system has to provide what I'll call micronodes around the entirety of the region, where if someone wants to ride their bike 5 miles to work or 10 miles to work, which we have employees that do, they're able to do that safely. That's just one example, not to mention, and again, I'm looking at it as an opportunity for those that don't have a car, that can't afford a car, choose not to drive a car, whatever. In a perfect world, they have the same opportunity in this region to commute as someone in the car. And I'm not jumping up and down one way or the other, and I'm not sure I even understand the camps. So I can't comment there. But what I can say is the holistic approach to mobility is the key piece here. And it's the mobility of people, goods, and services. And that includes all modes, that includes all aspects. And I think that the more we can paint the picture of a holistic approach, the better it'll resonate. And quite frankly, in my opinion, it's the right thing to do, because it will. So when Brian comes in on aviation or on whichever corridor, he's got an efficient way to get to wherever he's going. But if someone lives, and I don't know what the right distance is, but 5 or 10 miles and has no choice, alternate modes, transit, bike, ped, are truly options for those individuals by which to be a productive part of our community. So that's just, again, philosophical conversation, right? But I think it can set the stage for the discussion. And I would agree. I don't know that we're that far off. If we look at it holistically like that.
And then Paul.
Yeah, I also don't believe that we're that far off, although it's been 5 years and you would have to question me about that conclusion. There's a fundamental difference in this Citizens Advisory Committee, and as a result, I would think reflected into the community. And what Mike was just talking about, the urban core needs are, we're not perhaps a driving force in RTA 1. Most of the community, nearly the entire community, was not worried about the condition of the roads. They were worried about their commute times. And if you recall that time, there was a lot of discussion and heated discussion about freeways. The F word has not been spoken in the CAC this time around. And so I think I would have to say that this citizen-driven process has really reflected what Mike just expressed. And maybe that's part of why it's been so difficult to get there. But I think the idea of balancing all of these needs is what drove RTA 1 and ultimately made it successful, and what hopefully will do the same with RTA next. Although they may look different at the end, that process of coming to a holistic plan that achieves most of what people want and need is what we're aiming for. And I believe personally, not on behalf of the CAC, but I believe personally that the framework which this working group has developed has the potential to provide that sort of consensus. And, you know, Mike talked about consensus at the beginning. I'm also not very comfortable with a 9-7 vote, as no one would be. However, I do believe that consensus is available to us. So Pollyanna signing out.
Oh, go ahead.
2 points. One, I suspect projects are uniform, but I can speak to the Oro Valley's projects in particular, our 2 projects. Our 2 projects will provide pedestrian facilities where pedestrian facilities do not exist today. Our 2 projects will provide bicycle facilities where bicycle facilities do not exist today. There are also transit elements on the name for the validated projects. I think that we have a region have grown since the initial RTA, and that these are important elements of every single project. And it goes to the point number 2, which is I think we identify these elements and show where we are providing the safety elements where they don't exist today. That I think will help the CAC understand that these aren't just vehicular centric projects. They are including all these elements. And I have to say, at least for Oro Valley stance, is that where we don't have a pedestrian facility, where we don't have that bicycle facility, those are sorely needed. Because we have people walking on the shoulders. We have people riding their bicycles in the travel lanes. And these are incredibly important elements that we've heard loud and clear. And that's why I say I don't think we're that far off of the CAC. I say we stick with the list the way it is, because all of that is in there. And maybe that educational portion that we pull those elements out and show the CAC those individual elements, that might address Mike's point and might be able to tilt the scales of getting a better vote.
Along those lines, even the current RTA plan, if you look at most of the corridors, they all have all those components as well. So, all right, I think I know a few people need to leave right at 10:30. I'm sorry. So if there are no other questions, comments, we can adjourn unless anybody has any other.
So moved, seconded.
Move and second to adjourn.
And unanimously.
All right, unanimously. Okay, so with that, thank you all for participating. We are adjourned.
You're gonna stay.